So good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Tax Day. As you can see from the slide, hopefully everyone got their taxes off and wrote that check. So welcome to the combined February and April Bridge meetings. I want to start by putting you all on notice. I did not watch Game of Thrones last night. Okay? So no one talked to me about the show. I'm not turning on my phone today. I'm not on social media. Hopefully I can make it until 9 o'clock tonight so I can catch up. And I know there's a couple other people in this audience, so if you didn't see the show and you don't want to have it ruined, raise your hand. There you go. Okay, so there's a few people. So hopefully you were able to join us this morning. We had our coffee hour outside the McGowan Theater this morning. We have changed it from being upstairs to right outside the auditorium, so hopefully that is more convenient for you. And if you weren't able to join us, please do so at 9 o'clock before our next Bridge meeting. We'd like to thank the FRCP for co-hosting and helping to sponsor the coffee hour. So also want to also let you know that this afternoon we have our meet and greet session. Today it'll be upstairs in the Washington and Jefferson rooms. It is hosted by appraisal teams 2, 3, and 4 today. So you'll have a chance to meet your appraisal archivist, meet other NARA staff, including the reps from the FRCP and other NARA staff in attendance. Also, Maggie Hawkins, Director of Records Management Operations, is going to go a little bit deeper into one of the topics we're going to cover this morning on posting record schedules to regulations.gov. So please join us this afternoon if you work with appraisal teams 2, 3, and 4. Also, just logistics. For those of you in the audience, if you have a question at any point during the program, we have microphones on the aisles. Please identify who you are and what agency you came from. We're also monitoring chat on the webcast, so please do the same. Let us know who you are and what agency you're from, and we'll make sure we get your question asked. Also, we would like to hear from you if you have any general comments about the Bridge meeting. So we would love to hear from you at RM Communications through our mailbox. If you have any suggestions on how we can make Bridge better for you, please let us know. So before I get into the agenda, we have an introduction of a new NARA executive that many of you will be working with going forward. So at this point, I'm going to bring Jay Traynor, the executive for agency services, to make the introduction.
So good morning. I'm Jay Traynor, executive for agency services here at NARA, which includes the Chief Records Officer and the Federal Record Center program that you see here at Bridge all the time. But it also includes the Information Security Oversight Office, the Office of Government Information Services, and the National Declassification Center. And I have the honor this morning of introducing Bill Fischer as the new director of the NDC. Bill actually came on board the Monday we stood up after the government shutdown, but Bill will serve as the second director of the NDC. The NDC was created in 2009, and Bill will be the second director of that organization here at NARA. Bill actually worked for NARA from 1998 to 2008. Would have been in one of these seats at one point because he worked on some archival things, but also on records management at the National Archives. Then he left us and went to the State Department for about 10 years. Worked on a variety of aspects at the State Department that included records management, but also included declassification activities, and most recently worked on a project involving the government, 16 agencies throughout the federal government declassifying records from that dealt with Argentina. And it's kind of a note because on Friday we had a very big celebration here at Archives One where the Archivist of the United States handed over the last documents to the government of Argentina. So with that, let me bring up Bill Fischer and introduce him as the next director of the National Declassification Center.
Thank you, Jay. I feel like I'm sort of at home here, and I'm just going to take just a minute very briefly to say that my background, as Jay mentioned, and you can see up here, has spanned records management, information access, including declassification. And so for my part, I would just like to stress the importance of records managers working with information access professionals in your agencies, and for my own particular interest, for declassification programs. It may sound like somewhat of a cliche, but I actually believe it, and I think it's true, and that is that records management is the backbone of effective, accountable, and transparent government, okay? And I've seen it in my career working at the National Archives, working in an agency, and now back at the National Archives. The importance of records managers working with their declassification folks, their FOIA people, in order to get good, solid tracking and control over their records, an understanding of their records in the electronic sphere in terms of good, solid metadata, schemas, formatting issues. And when records managers and declassification professionals work together, plan, and sort of chart a course, it just makes it a heck of a lot easier on the back end, at the end of the records life cycle, when you are reaching final disposition, when you're at the point of conducting declassification reviews and transferring records, to have all of that squared away. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's essential for records management to have a seat at that table and to bring in these other folks in order to really, have a good, solid management of your records across the full life cycle. With that, thank you.
Okay, so before we get into our program, just wanted to review the agenda so you can see what it looks like. We're going to start with David Williams, who's going to review agency disposition profiles, which many of you should already have in hand. David was snowed in Chicago, so he's going to be joining us by phone. Our next presentation is David Miller, going to talk about current digitization services offered by the FRCP, and David Miller actually made it in from Philadelphia. Then we're going to, as I mentioned, Maggie's going to talk about posting record schedules to regulations.gov. We're going to have a training update from our training director, Gary Ralphus. We are then going to have Lisa Haralampus, Director of Policy and Outreach within the Office of the Chief Records Officer, talk about digitization regulation update. We are then going to have Jim come up and talk about changes to the website. I will then pretend to be Don Rosen, who is on vacation this week, and just give you a quick update on where we are with the reporting period and the milestones and deadlines coming up. And then we're going to, if we have time, and there's a lot on this agenda, so we're hoping we do have some time at the end of the program, we're just going to do a Q&A session with me and the other managers and representatives from NARA, just to see what's on your mind, have some discussion about things that are going on in your agencies or coming out of NARA that you'd like to talk to us about. So we will see how that goes. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jim, who's going to connect David Williams and talk to you about the disposition profile.
Can you hear me, Jim?
We can now, David, yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So yes, as Lawrence mentioned, I am joining from Chicago. I guess it was inevitable because last time I was out there, I believe I was complaining about the weather in D.C., and so I got to experience thunder snow yesterday in the middle of April for the first time in my life. So yeah, I guess I will take D.C. weather over Chicago weather and count my blessings next time. So yeah, I'm here to talk just a bit about the agency disposition profile. Next slide, please. And they should have gone out on April 1st, 2019. If you did not get yours, please let your account manager know. And those should have gone, by the way, to agency records officers and SAORMs. So if you are not one of those people, please let your agency records officer know. And then I'm just going to go, you might have noticed it's a little different this year. So I'm just going to review the FY19 changes compared to what you've seen in previous years. Next slide, please. So this is just, I know it's going to be very hard to see because there's a lot on the slide. I just wanted to put the two up right next to each other just so you could see there's just a little bit difference in the format. We added another field in 2019 and put a little bit more information on there. Next slide, please. All right, so here I just, on each slide, I went through and highlighted the substantive changes. There were some minor changes, like we didn't have cubic feet under the pending section in 2018. I didn't see a need to highlight that. But you'll notice on the first section that last year we spelled out pending, deferred, and et cetera, and this year we just refer to those as ambiguous disposition records. Maybe if some of you were at the BRIDG meeting last April, you heard Marcus Most talk about ambiguous disposition records, and that is the new term that we are using, what we previously called limbo codes, but the official term is ambiguous disposition. And then we put a little below that called out what the ambiguous disposition records include. Next slide, please. So here's the first where we split something out into a different section. Last year in section 2, we had the till records and the unscheduled records. This year, the till is, I believe, done, and that is not on the agency disposition profile anymore. And then the unscheduled records you will see on the next slide that we moved to its own section. And then we also put a total of the volume in 2019. Next slide, please. And here's where we have the unscheduled records, because really it didn't make sense to put them in the past disposition section, and so we put them in their own section. And then just a little note that because it is a mix theoretically of what's going to end up being temporary and permanent. For the annual cost, we use the 50-50 mix. Next slide, please. Not really much of a change here. We did include for some agencies, it'll be all of your freezes. But if you have a lot of freezes in place, we put really kind of the major freezes that are there. Certainly, if you have questions about freezes in place, another question you can refer to your account manager. Next slide, please. This section, other than a different number in 2018, there was no change. And next slide. Are there any questions? Am I still connected?
I was waiting to see. We don't see anybody headed towards the microphones, Dave, so I don't think there are any questions.
Okay, great. Well, you'll notice I did put Scott Rowley's information up here, not mine. He really is the expert on this profile, and it did come from his office. So if you do have any questions that might be beyond what your account manager may know the answer to, please feel free to refer those to Scott Rowley. And if there are no questions, then that'll wrap up my portion.
Okay, thanks, Dave. We're going to turn it back over to Lawrence now. Or I'm sorry, we're going to turn it over to Dave Williams, or Dave Miller.
All right, thanks.
I'm the latest Dave to talk to you. I'm David Miller. Let's see if I can advance these slides. Okay. I just want to talk briefly about the Federal Record Centers program and talk about our digitization services. I think I come to BRIDG every couple of years to remind you that we do offer those services, both large-scale projects, scale scanning, as well as one-off reference scanning for records that are stored in the record centers. So I'm going to brief you a little bit about where we are and how that process works if you want to work with us and get some of your records digitized. Especially with our strategic plan, every agency needs to be thinking deep thoughts about what to do with whatever analog records you still have. Certainly we're moving very rapidly towards all digital government, and born digital records can be managed digitally. But in many cases we have hybrid collections or legacy analog records that still have business value, still have maybe historical value, that you need to take some action to make sure that you've handled responsibly over the next couple of years, especially after 2022 when you're unable to transfer analog records to the FRCs or accession those into the National Archives. So over the next couple of years, you should be thinking about what the most valuable paper or analog records you might have floating around your agency or still in active use, and thinking about what you need to do to digitize those if those have ongoing business needs. So of course, our core service at the FRCP for this is really just the conversion itself, getting those records from analog form into a digital format so you can make use of them for ongoing business systems or for archival preservation. But alongside that, we really think of these as records projects or records management projects with a scanning component. So we really ask serious questions of you as the records owner about what your access points are, what your needs are in terms of indexing and metadata. In some cases, we can capture that metadata automatically through the scanning process. In other cases, we can key in later after the fact to apply item or collection level metadata to make those records more useful. But that's something certainly that's part of our conversation whenever we work with an agency who asks us about scanning. We're not just talking about getting records from paper to scan, but there's everything that goes alongside that both before and after the scanning process. We're very interested in the quality control especially because most of the records that I think that you need to scan, that are most cost effective to scan, are of long-term value or of historical value or things you're going to be keeping for decades and decades. And we want to do it right. We want to make sure those images are readable and usable for your business, but also for historical records that those are of high enough quality that the public reference, public research is going to be available for those. We do large project scanning in terms of, you might have hundreds of cubic feet or thousands of cubic feet, as the case may be, of legacy records that we can scan for you. And that's where we want to get into some of the details about your requirements and some of the metadata and the access points. But we also offer one-off reference scanning. I think you're probably aware of this. For records that are stored in the Federal Record Centers, for a number of years, we've offered smart scan services where you can get very quick reference copy scans delivered back to you securely, either within 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on the size of the request. That's available at all of our record centers for anything you already have stored with us. And if you're thinking about transferring new records in, that might be part of your reference practice, that you expect that you'll have a certain amount of digital reference on those records rather than mailing them back to you when they're needed. We offer that smart scan service across our system. This is really just to highlight the areas where the Record Center tries to offer our services as close to cost as possible. So we're trying to save money as much as possible, find efficiencies where we can. These steps in the process are areas where, depending on your requirements, depending on your needs, the price may have to go up or down, depending on what decisions we make. If the records are well managed, if these are records that are in good order, they're well labeled, they're not too difficult to deal with, the document preparation of these records for scanning might be minimal. That might not be very costly at all. But if the records are a mess, if they're voluminous, if they're complex, if there are a lot of different parts to them and different kinds of formats within those records, that document preparation might be a significant effort. The scanning itself, of course, different resolutions, different color versus black and white or grayscale. We're going to see different throughput, and it's going to be a different cost for us to be able to deliver those images to you. So you understanding your records the best, you're the creators, you're the owners, you've got some scanning requirements about what you need to see the output image look like and what resolution it needs to be and what you want to use that image for. Scanning might be the easiest part of it, the most straightforward part of the process. It's everything around the scanning that might be more challenging in many cases. The indexing and metadata, like I said, that's super important for us because we're looking at the ongoing business use or just access to these records. We're not just scanning for the sake of scanning. So the indexing and metadata, whether you as records creators already have a good system of item level or aggregate level metadata or access points that we can make use of, and we can point those images to those indexes, that's fine. Or in some cases, we're creating entirely new indexes and creating new metadata through the process. And we'll increase your access to the records likewise. But if we're doing a lot of the indexing, a lot of the metadata, if we're doing a lot of work to do metadata capture, that might increase your per image cost on a given scanning project. If you're absorbing that burden, if you've got folks in your shop who can do the metadata, who can do the indexing, who can link those images to a system and make access happen on your side, the cost for the scanning part will be a lot less. And of course, quality control alongside all of this, depending on whether these are permanent records, temporary records, what have you, we might have different regimen for quality control to make sure that we're getting images that are what you need and the quality that you need. And the last one in yellow that we can't read is image delivery, the final point. How do you want these images given to you, whether they're on an encrypted hard drive, whether we're setting up some sort of secure transfer mechanism, delivering those images back to you as records owners so you can take those records and put them in your business systems and make use of them. That's roughly the process, and that's roughly where we have decision points that might affect the cost one way or the other. In summary, we do customized indexing if needed. We produce archival formats for our output, so you can not just use these for your business, but eventually accession these records into the National Archives. A good recent example of that, we've been doing a project with the Park Service, and we've got a lot of high-quality images in the NARA catalog for the National Historic Landmarks and National Historic Places. So if you want to look through the NARA catalog, get an example of what that finished product looks like for archival records, you can do a search on any one of the states around the country for historic landmarks and pull up those records. That's work that we did in conjunction with Park Service. And of course, quality assurance is part of what we're about. We don't do this just to do it quickly and cheaply. We do it so it's done responsibly, so you get a good finished product. So we have a quality assurance process. We have quality control throughout, using the technology and the individuals in our program to do it right. If you've got any questions, you can contact me directly. I'll be at the meet and greet. For those of you sticking around for the afternoon, I will be around for the meet and greet at 1 o'clock. If you've got specific questions about collections that you have, you can contact me directly, or you can send an email to our FRCP scanning email box, and one of us will act on that. Of course, your account managers, many of them are in the room today. You can contact your FRC account manager directly as well, and he or she will act on this, and we'll get together with you. Any questions for the moment on scanning or digitization?
Yes.
You wait for the mic, please.
Hi. Good morning. Tom Link from the Air Force. Question, Mr. Miller. Can the FRC digitize hard copy analog records that are at the classified and top secret level?
Unfortunately, we can only scan records unclassified at this point. We don't have the classified scanning capabilities that you're talking about.
Just to piggyback off of that, is that
No piggybacking.
does that include CUI material?
Yes, we can scan CUI material.
Okay.
Plenty of we routinely handle CUI, PII, health information, as long as it's not classified. And we've got secure delivery of that material, so the PII and CUI is handled appropriately.
Sammy here. Do you have a reference to someone that does the scanning for classified that we can talk to?
Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have a direct reference for someone who can do classified scanning. We don't have that capability, and we don't direct you to anyone in the private sector in particular who might be able to do that. Any last questions about scanning, digitization? Or at least this part of it. I know Lisa's talking later about the regulatory side of things with scanning, but in terms of FRCP services, I guess we're good, and I'll be around at 1 o'clock for the meet and greet if anyone has any more specific questions. Thank you.
Good morning. Glad to see you all here. We're going to take just a brief break from digitization and talk a little bit about the changes to the public commenting process on proposed record schedules. So I'm going to talk about the old process and then talk about the new process, show you a few screenshots of the new process, and also discuss some of the reasons why we're moving to the new process and what impact it may have on all of you as federal agencies. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the old process. As many of you know, all record schedules that have temporary records on the schedule are posted to the Federal Register for notice to the public for a chance to comment on those schedules. It only applies to schedules with temporary records, and as I'll reference in one of the later slides, it is required by statute. So as part of this part of our old process, for years we've been publishing abstracts of the record schedules after they've been through the NAR review process. And so members of the public then would have a chance to read those abstracts, and they would had to have contacted us by email to request a copy of the schedule and the appraisal memo to review them and send us any comments via email. We then would engage in conversations back and forth with the requester via email, sometimes in multiple rounds, sometimes not. And that until we reached a resolution, and then would work with the agency on potentially changing the schedule or moving forward as is. So that was the old process, and I want to talk a little bit about the new process. And when I talk about that, I'll give a little bit more information about what kind of comments we get and how we address them. So under the new process, what we'll be doing is we are still posting a notice in the Federal Register, and it will not contain an abstract of the schedule. Instead, it'll just have the schedule title, and it will link to regulations.gov. That is actually not a change. The old notices for years have been linking to regulations.gov. What is new, however, is that on regulations.gov, we will be posting the schedule and the appraisal memo at the same time on regulations.gov. Any member of the public can read it, and there's a comment now button, which I'll show you later in a screenshot, where they can make comments directly on regulations.gov. Those comments will be posted on there, and we will be intaking all comments during a 45-day comment period, and then we will intake those comments and review, analyze them, work with the agencies to answer them. And then we will be posting what we're calling a consolidated reply, which you can see from it's common terminology used by other agencies as well, that will address the comments and state what our proposed resolution is, and then that will be a final decision, and we will be moving forward on signing the schedule. So what is not changing in this? So overall, the goal of the public comment process, there's multiple goals. One, it's required by statute, but more importantly, it's a chance for the public to have an opportunity to comment on proposed destruction of federal records. And the goal has always been to address all substantive comments. And I'll talk a little bit about what might not be substantive comments and what might be. But that's the overall goal, and that overall goal is not changing. We also, NARA handles the comment adjudication process, and that part is not changing. As an agency, you may not be aware at all of comments we may have received. If there's something we can answer in-house without going back to you, if we do have to go back to you, and many of you may have experienced that, we still handle determining which ones to go back to an agency to talk about, how to frame up the answers, and we're the ones who interact with the public on it. So as I note too, as before, NARA may involve you in it. We spend a great deal of time analyzing the comments when they come in, and what we do is we reach back to the agency if there's questions we can't answer, if we need to make additional appraisal visits, or if we need to discuss possible changes to the schedule. That's what we did before, and we will continue to do that. What I wanted to do before I talk a little bit more about the type of comments we receive is just put up a couple screenshots of regulations.gov so you can see how this will work. Right now, we have 2 rounds that have been posted. some of you may have some schedules in them, so we posted them back in March. The first one closes in late April to comments, and you can see that to the right of each schedule is a button where somebody can comment, and it also states when the comments are due. This was the second round that was posted. We did a round of about a dozen and then another round of a dozen. There will be a third register posted this week with closer to 20, and then following on the heels of that will be another one in a week or two, and that will have caught us up to all the ones that hadn't been done during the shutdown and as we were gearing up to make this change in late fall. So that gives you a sample of one of the screenshots. And everyone is funneled through a common comment form. If any of you as private citizens or in your capacity have ever commented on anything on regulations.gov, you'll be familiar with this format. It's a standard format where requesters provide their information, their comments, and can also upload attachments. Those are usually public interest groups or state governments or others who may want to put it on their letterhead, who may attach more formal written comments. Even though a first and last name is required, there is no identification, verification, or profile that's required to be set up, so someone can comment anonymously even if they need to fill those fields out. And here's a comment from another agency just to give you a flavor of how a comment may look when posted. As of this morning, we have no comments yet received on the 2 rounds that have already been published, the roughly 20 plus schedules that are up there already. So we can't show you one of ours because we haven't seen one yet. And another thing to know is that there's a lot of capability in regulations.gov for signing up for email alerts, and that can be for all NARA postings, for ones just for your specific schedule. If you were interested in doing that, you can go on to regulations.gov. You can see the sign up for email alerts. To my mind, for you as an agency, it's a little bit like, overwatching your TSP balance. You really probably don't want to necessarily sign up for alerts and be watching every little thing that comes in, since we intake them all, analyze them, and come back to you. However, you are absolutely free to do so if you choose to do that for each schedule or for all NARA schedules or all schedules that are posted. As I mentioned, this is the public comments required by U.S. Code, and it's also governed by the Administrative Procedure Act. So we have a lot of rules to follow, guidelines. Our posting period is 45 days, and it will run 45 days for all, and the comment period will end when that 45 days is ended. We also have to be very careful to address all comments and keep a written record of them. We put them in the dossiers with the other parts of the schedule. So we also frequently consult with our legal staff to make sure we are operating within the bounds of the Administrative Procedure Act. There have been several lawsuits recently involving records management and other agencies, and often they are brought under the Administrative Procedure Act. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, before I talk about why we're changing now, I want to talk a little bit about the type of comments we receive and how we handle them. We receive, historically, and I've got some statistics later, not that many comments on schedules, although it's growing. And they traditionally have been very focused on the records themselves, the dispositions, and increasingly we're seeing a wider variety of comments and a lot of comments that I would consider to be out of scope comments. So for instance, an in-scope comment may be someone may suggest that a record series should be permanent instead of temporary for whatever reason they may have. That's what I would call a classic comment from the Federal Register. Increasingly, over the last several years, we have seen more and more comments on temporary records, and often not to necessarily make them permanent, but to extend retention periods. That's a fairly recent phenomenon. If you go back to the 90s, we received no comments, I would say, on lengthening retention periods. It was pretty rare, and that's becoming increasingly common. Those types of comments are ones that we would consider actionable and ones that we would talk to the agency and look at the reasons why and pursue potentially changing the record schedule. We have increasingly been getting what I would consider out-of-scope comments. That may be things like Agency X should be abolished, or the head of Agency X should be fired. More of a political nature and whatnot. And that is a growing trend across regulations.gov. That's not unique to us in the record schedules. So those are the type of comments that we would consider out of scope. And going back to our consolidated reply, where we will be replying to all the comments, there will be a category for out of scope comments. So we will make a nod to those and just note that they are out of scope. The more substantive comments, let's go back to lengthening a retention period. Let's say somebody, and this is purely hypothetical, suggests that a retention period should be lengthened because in various states across the U.S., the ability to file a lawsuit is longer, the statute of limitations is longer, therefore, even though these are federal records, they may play into that. So therefore, the retention period needs to be extended by 5 years. That's a highly actionable substantive comment. We would talk to the agency, bring their legal counsel in, talk to our legal counsel, and there may be some good reasons to change the schedule. In a case like that, in our consolidated reply, let's say all parties decided we should change it and lengthen the retention period by 5. We would discuss that in the consolidated reply, state that that was our intention to do that. We would have the agency on board with that before we posted that consolidated reply. And then we might reference the other out-of-scope comments we received and just kind of make a note to them. One of the other classic, I wouldn't call it out of scope, but it's what I would consider unactionable. We get a lot of comments recently about how every single record that Agency X produces must be saved. We do not go to an agency and start discussing how we might take in all of their records, including their time and attendance records and whatnot. We don't consider it out of scope because it's a records question. However, we don't really engage in discussions about really are we going to take this agency that has 25,000 employees, take in all their records permanently forever. Again, we will mention it in the consolidated reply. However, we will have some standard language talking about the importance of records management as a way of addressing that comment. So you may wonder why we're changing now. We had a process that some people may have felt worked just fine, but we felt for a variety of reasons it was important to change this process. One is the enhanced capabilities of regulations.gov. We had, in the process of modernizing this process and moving away solely from email, we did look at other potential options, posting it on NARA's website. There are some other agency third-party providers for hosting sites for intaking comments. What we discovered was regulations.gov had kind of changed some of their capabilities where we were able to post each of the schedules in batches as opposed to separate dockets, which drives down both our administrative costs and our real cost of what we would need to pay regulations.gov to host all those schedules. We process roughly 400 to 500 schedules a year. So being able to batch them and save on both the administrative costs and the real costs proved to be useful. And regulations.gov had enhanced a few capabilities that allowed us to do that while we were examining other options over the last year. Also, there is a growing public interest in record schedules. You can pick up the paper virtually any day, crack open, any online media source, and if you spend more than a few minutes looking, you will find some article where there, at the foundation of it, may be some records issue. Either someone's complaining that someone's not creating records, or they're throwing them away, or the records are used as evidence in a lawsuit or a complaint or something. It's really quite foundational, and more members of the public and public interest groups have clued into this and are realizing the connection, which on the one hand is great because it really highlights the importance of records management and what all of us here in this room are doing. The other side of that is that we may see an increase in comments. We have in general, and we may once we continue to post these on regulations.gov. However, NARA and the government has an interest in transparency and being more transparent in our decision making. There were a lot of requests from the public to move to an online posting of the schedules and move away from having people, may I please have a copy of the schedule and the appraisal. During this time, we were already looking at our various options, and you all know how it is in the government when you're exploring various options. It can take a little time to do that. We had a lot of requirements to look at. We have a lot of administrative things on the back end that aren't necessarily apparent to users. So that dovetailed nicely. People were requesting it right as we were about to make that transition regardless. So another reason is, I mentioned increasing public interest. There has been a steady rise in the percentage of schedules that were requested under the old process. And in FY14, about roughly 40% of the schedules were requested. By FY18, that had risen to about 73%. So virtually all schedules were being asked for anyway. So obviously proactively disclosing them in advance is to everyone's advantage. And interestingly, during this rise in the increase of requests, the percentage of schedules commented on has remained relatively steady. Only about 4 to 5% of schedules receive comments. If you go poking around on our schedule regulations.gov, you will see a lot of schedules covering very often mundane records. Federal government's vast, it's complex, there's records all across it. A lot of them just aren't going to elicit public interest. And from those, over the last few years, about 1% of them end up being changed as a result. And it's ranged from lengthening retention periods to sometimes clarifying item descriptions. That's a little more rare. And I'm hesitant to say any have been moved to the permanent category off the top of my head, but there may have been some. But so we spend a lot of time and we treat each comment very seriously, whether it comes from an individual or a public interest group or a state government. But in the end, in sorting through, we often find that the right decisions were made initially and the schedule often remains unchanged. What impact might this have on you? As I mentioned, we just moved to this process in March. We've posted 2 batches, and with a third coming. And there may be more comments on schedules. It's hard to say. We haven't seen it yet, although the first batch has till the end of April before the comment period expires. So that remains to be seen. I think the overall effect on the time to process record schedules, again, is a bit of an unknown quantity. We've experienced some efficiencies in moving to this process on our end that may be reflected in faster processing times. If we receive many more comments, that might balance out. It just remains to be seen. However, in general, we're modernizing this process, and it's in line with other records management goals of modernizing processes. So I think overall, I think it's a positive benefit for both agencies and the public. And also, given that it's more open and transparent, we're hoping over time to have the public have a greater comfort level with the notion that federal records are in fact often appraised as temporary, the bulk of them are, and they are eventually destroyed. We are seeing a lot of people who this is a very disturbing concept to them, that any federal records are destroyed. Clearly people aren't aware of the staggering volumes of federal records. However, we have been educating more and reaching out to public interest groups and various user groups more on that front, and we hope over time that will improve. And also it's not in here, but I did want to make a note that we are, as part of that outreach, in late May, we are doing a webinar for the commenting public. And it was mentioned in the Archivist blog post last week, and you will see it in Records Express blog. While anyone can dial in, up to 1,000 people, and I'd be really shocked if we had 1,000 people dialing in to hear about commenting on record schedules. However, I just want to make the point that it really is aimed at the commenting public. I'm here today to talk to you all as federal agencies. I'll be at the after BRIDG meetings, and you can contact me anytime or your appraiser about it. So our goal there is to work and try to educate as many of the user groups, some of the library groups, the archival groups, the public interest groups, and any other members of the public who happen to see it, about the need to schedule records. We'll have a brief bit about that, and the role of public comments, and hopefully, talk a little bit about steering people towards the more substantive, actionable comments that we can really hope to try to address and work through. So again, that's in late May, and it'll be part of our larger effort to help educate the public. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions about this. Hi, Rich.
If a commenter directs a question directly to the agency, they look up the agency and send it to the agency, what should the agency do?
So the question was, what if a commenter goes straight to the agency? In my experience, when they do that, they usually hit both NARA and the agency, so we already have the comment. But let's say they don't. The agency would need to direct the individual to NARA, to regulations.gov. The comment will not be taken unless it's handled through the proper channels. We're tightening up on a lot of that. That's part of the modernizing, is tightening up on all those rules surrounding it. And the goal of that is to make it more efficient, but it's also to make it more fair so that everyone's treated equally in the process. Any other questions about it? Nope. Any online questions? Nope. All right. I will turn it over to our training director.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Gary Ralphus. I'm the Director of Records Management Training. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of update as we go through this major transition year for both you and us regarding records management training, on where we are at in building some new stuff, and then a few reminders of what changes here at the end of this fiscal year that has a significant impact on you all. So many of you will have seen this slide before. I am excited because it's mostly green these days. So in our new curriculum that we've been building, there are 3 levels. Just as a reminder, the bottom level for custodians is that day-to-day office work that many folks do. Middle level, those liaisons that often serve out in your field locations as overseeing records management in a building or a number of field locations. And then obviously the top tier targeted to those agency records officers. So we finished the last pilot course for the second tier in February. So it is done. And we are pretty well through the analysis and design for the third level. So we'll start running pilots. I'll show you the slide schedule for the third level in May. and are on track to finish this, probably all the development by September, maybe early October, and then the last pilot in November for the third level. Little delay there. Obviously, we had a few days that we couldn't work on it there, so we had to back things up. And with that, we'll also continue to work on building pretests. So a big change that will come with this for new records officers is instead of being forced through all the courses, our goal is to try to assess what you already know up front and only make you take the things that you did not pass those tests for. So again, what's the end state? A set of skills and knowledge for records officers, and let's only make you take the training that fills the gaps that you currently have rather than sitting through everything. Beyond what you see in this flow chart, there's a whole bunch of other elective content that we'll be working on as we free up resources to do that. And then obviously we've got some branding, some policy issues that go with this. Last Friday, I sent Lawrence the latest draft of the policy that will go with this program. So I think we're in a good shape to work that through internally and get that out to you all in the coming months too. So everything is on track for this. A little bit deeper dive. So here are the courses that sit at each level. Probably no surprises in the titles here. The one change you see, though, is at the third level where we've really focused on a little different areas than the life cycle, right? So specifically building a course about how to write record schedules, how to apply the general record schedule, building a course about maintaining and running a records management program, right? And then also a much greater focus on electronic records management for you all as records officers. With this, we've started to lay this out in more detail now in a way that we think we can share some of this. So if you want to see the next level down, what topics are in each course? What are some of the things that you've built that I might want to think about reusing? If you would, send me an email. This is just a sample that we can send you this whole chart that basically says, hey, for this topic, here's how we've treated it, particularly where you see that self-paced e-learning. That's a module of training that you can grab from us and go put in your learning management system in your agency if you want to reuse it. So I think there'll be benefit for you at some point of looking at what's the details of what we're building and how potentially can you reuse them as you take on a greater role in running training for your agencies. A couple of screenshots. Another thing you will see is we've tried to focus a lot more in our training now on the application of what's learned. Not can you tell us back what you were supposed to learn, but can you use it? So here you see a question about, hey, this records from the scenario that you read on the previous screen, are they covered by the GRS or not? It's not enough that you know there's a GRS. It's that you can use it to make decisions about whether or not you need to schedule a record. Similar here, here's a question about, hey, has somebody else got similar records? If I'm writing a record schedule, why should I start from nothing when there may be, in fact, other agencies with similar functions, similar missions that have already scheduled similar records? They may not be right for you, but it's a good starting point to think about what should you do with proposing retention for those records. So there's a couple samples of that. I wanted to pause here and say thank you to all of you. Many of the folks in your agencies have been a big part of getting us this far, whether it was talking to you about how you do these different tasks in your agencies or having folks participate in those pilots and giving their feedback to make some improvements to the courses as we go. And with that, I will also ask for some continued help. So records officers or folks that do similar things in your agencies to you all, here in a few weeks we will kick off a pilot for the record scheduling course. Right now we've got about 50 volunteers already, but we'd love to have you participate in that. So you can reach out to Michelle or myself if you want involvement. The program management piece, we're planning that pilot for sometime in July. We will get specific dates out as we get a little closer. And then the electronic records management will come in November. In terms of kind of time investment, the record scheduling we're guessing right now is 8 to 12 hours of seat time at the most, right? So folks that have some experience might go quicker. Program management, probably going to be a little smaller than that, so I'm thinking 6 to 8 hours. The electronic records management, there are roughly 10 tasks in there, and so we're still doing the design of those. My guess would that's going to be somewhere in that 16 to 20 hour range. As we get a little bit closer, we'll give you another update so you can start planning. But your feedback as we do these first runs really helps us figure out What did we communicate well? What are some minor tweaks we can make that'll make it more usable for you and help people learn better from these products? Another thing we've been working on is a better way to help you with your all hands training. So we built a product last year for the National Endowment for the Arts that meets all of the requirements in the 2017 training bulletin. And we did this largely with text-based training. So there's not a lot of need to have audio re-recorded. We can go in and change things very quickly to be specific to your agency, like the branding. Or if you wanted to say, hey, here are specific examples of permanent records we use all the time I'd like to have noted in there. Very, very quick and easy for us to do that change. So if you still have a need for all hands training, let me know. We'll see if we can work with you on that. The other thing we've done is pull in some of that other content from the new curriculum. So in this case, there was a practice exercise we built for the course at level 1 about how to identify records and non-records. We didn't need to recreate that. We just pull that piece of training right in and reuse it here. So we can customize this very quickly for you. If you've looked at other things we have built and want to use a module from that other curriculum and dump it into a product like this can all go very quickly. I can rebrand something like this in about 5 minutes for you, right? And then if we look at doing content changes in the text, it's all very quick, right? So again, we're trying to think about ways we can give you training products that will help you down the road very quickly, very easily. Now, we promised you to put training material online, and lo and behold, we have gotten that started. So if you go to the records managers portion of archives.gov, you'll now see that in the training section, the first item is a training catalog. And it's very at the beginning stage, but when you click on that, it will take you to a front page that shows all of the knowledge area courses, right? All those materials are still valuable, still good. Where you see blue text, there'll be a hyperlink that takes you to them. In fact, our screenshot is outdated. I took this at the beginning of last week. By the end of last week, all of the knowledge areas are there except KA6. So that is the one that is yet to be posted. Once you go to that page, you'll see you have the participant guide, the slides, and any handouts for that course, all in PDF format. If you want the source documents, the PowerPoint file, the Word document that was the participant guide, please email us. All right, we've run into some serious challenges making those accessible. So going PDF was the best solution to get them online, and be aware of our requirement to make online materials accessible. But we certainly recognize you might want to take that, make some modifications that fit whatever your training need is. All you need to do is send us an email. We will get those transferred over to you in the best way possible. Last, as a reminder, this is our last year doing face-to-face training. This is our last year training anybody that is not an SAO designated records management officer. So you can imagine there's been a demand. Right now, the wait lists for many of our classes are in the 80 to 90 range. I say this also to beg for your help in one way. We're also seeing here in Washington, D.C., a fairly significant increase in the amount of people that don't show up for training. So anywhere in the 25 to 30% range. What we have been telling other folks that are trying to get into training is, hey, take the risk if you want to. If you show up and we have an empty seat, we will put you in that class. But I would ask all of you that are in touch with the communities in your agencies, if your people have been signing up for training, please ask them to fulfill their commitment or withdraw soon enough that we can get another person into that seat and not have us wasting those training spaces. So we want to try to minimize the no-shows if we can. Lastly, if you are a newly designated agency records officer and happen to be here and need training, or you are getting that in your agencies, just email me directly. We will get that person into training. We will make space for them, even if it means someone else has to be removed from a class list, because you're required to get it done. And we'll make sure that happens. And then last, some planning for you all, right? So reminder, all those folks that you have been signing to NARA for many years to get training, we will not be doing that for you anymore starting 1 October. So we're here to help though. So as you start thinking about what are the things you might need to ramp up to train those folks in your own agency, please give us a call. If we can help you, we'll try to make any and all of our training materials available to you in whatever formats we have them that works for you. Reminder, we are not going to train those folks after 1 October. We will run one more knowledge area series because of the government shutdown. We'll run that in late October, early November for anyone that is a newly designated records officer at that point that still needs to get their certificate. That will be the last run. Next January, we'll start working with the new curriculum, so any records officer coming in after that will get that, all right? And then again, a reminder, I'll try not to do this too many times, but if you are a new records officer or you're getting one, the best way for them to get in training is just email me directly. If they go on the website and try to sign up for classes, they're just going to go, what do I do, as they look at these long wait lists that are coming. And then I'd ask you to take this back to your agencies. Couple of messages to start talking about with internally, because when we see your folks come to class still, many of them have no idea that they're not going to send people next year to the National Archives to get training still. So please start planning how are you going to handle this with your records management communities in your agencies. I think there's a little bit sometimes of a communication gap between what you all at your headquarters hear and know and what goes on out in the field. So if you can help us with that, that would be great. And then those folks that have taken training, we have seen a lot of this year too. Hey, I took classes 5-6 years ago. I heard the certificate's going away. Wait a second, I never took my tests. Can I take my tests now? Because I still want the certificate. Yep, you can, up until September 15th, right? We run our last classes roughly to the middle of September. The people in that last batch, both here and in Chicago, we will give them till the end of September to wrap up their tests. Obviously, they need a little time. But for everybody else that did part of it and wants to finish, they need to get on with it. And they also need to pay attention to their record keeping. So we are not going to be producing course completion certificates or the entire certificate for people after September 15th. So if you can't get something out of our learning management system and you need it, please contact us soon so that we can rectify that for you. But we're not going to work backwards after the 15th of September. Essentially, we've got a lot of shutting down of accounts to do so that we can do the cost savings associated with some of these changes. So we want to serve you the best we can, but there are some limits on what we're going to be able to do after that date for you. Okay. So let me pause there, take a few quick questions, and then see what goes on with the rest here. So Jim, I see it looks like you have one.
Yeah, Gary, I have one question from online. Have any of the training products completed any 508 compliance certification?
So we have been doing 508 along the way with the new stuff. So as we've been building the templates, we've been working with our contractor to make sure each of those screen templates is 508 compliant in and of itself. So to the best of our knowledge at this point, we are building compliant courseware. All right, other questions? Yes?
Hey, Gary, this is Sammy again. On your first note, it says start planning for how your agency office will train RM staff. Are those designated RM staff or people that's collaterally doing records management for the office?
So I'm going to repeat your question just to make sure it went through the system to the folks online. So the question was, for the training, are we referring to designated records management professionals in an agency for that training or anybody in that agency? And my answer is yes, right? So as agency records officers, you have the responsibility for training records management in your agencies, whether that be all employees or the staff that you consider part of your records management community or professionals in your agency. So that applies all the way across the board, from every employee and contractor that needs that basic records management piece up to whatever your records management program staff are that need deeper knowledge about what they're doing with records.
So I'm going back to 3 slides. Are you going to put in a customer engagement slide deck in there for training agency records officer how to train other people?
You know what? Let me stop flipping around because I'll answer you. It's not, the piece on how to do training is at the second tier of the curriculum, but there is stuff in there. If you were to get that whole Excel sheet from me, you'll see that it's there. It's already built in about how do you plan for training and build it. And in fact, I will call out and thank our folks from the Library of Congress who had a big hand in helping us build out that particular module. Other questions?
Yes, here, Donna. Those of us that have been RM for a long time and have certificates that have been predated to your disposition schedules of training records, do we need to do retesting to get new certificates before this period expires, or are those going to be continually available?
So I don't want to get too far ahead of the policy till Lawrence tells me it's approved. I will say we are going to make a very distinct difference between the current Certificate of Federal Records Management Training and the new program. It will have a different title, intentionally to separate out what are the requirements for this thing going forward that apply to designated agency records officers without having any impact on anybody in the past that has achieved a certificate under the current program. Does that help answer it? I know I'm being a little bit vague because I don't want to set a policy that hasn't been approved today. Okay.
Hey, Gary, I got another one from online while we're waiting. Have you talked to ICRM and other organizations to get these courses pre-approved for continuing education credits?
We have not. That would not be in our role. I think that's a question for the professional organizations to make determinations about. I will say, in particular, the ICRM, early on they asked for us to share what we could about the direction we were going with the new curriculum. And they built the entire federal track of the new ICRM around our curriculum design that we had at that point in time. So in many ways, those two things are in sync. How they will determine equivalent credit is really up to them. Okay, I'm going to step off now, turn it back over to Lawrence, and then be happy to take any other questions that come up either during a break at lunch, or I'll be around a little bit this afternoon too if other things come up.
Thanks, Gary. A lot of good information there, and a lot of changes going on in training for you all to be aware of, and some really good things coming as far as the content that's going to be available online. So as I mentioned at the outset, I'm going to pretend to be Don Rosen, who is on spring break. Just a couple of quick updates on the reporting period. So hopefully this doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, but the reporting period closes. Actually, that's incorrect. It closes on the 19th, not today. Today would be tax day, and maybe, Don was doing the slides. He was thinking, I got to get my taxes done. The reporting period closes this Friday. So what we need to hear from you or receive from you is either your email report, RMSA, and SAORM reports by Friday, or get in touch with us if you need an extension. We are certainly sensitive to the fact that this has been, it's been a challenging year. So we had the shutdown. We were supposed to open the reporting period in the beginning of January, and we had to compress the time frame a bit so that we could release the reporting period, or the reports from the reporting period, before the end of the fiscal year. So we are aware of that. I hope that you all have made progress and are able to submit your reports by Friday, but if not, please let us know to the email address that's at the bottom of the slide where you are. If you do need an extension, we're certainly happy to talk to you about that. So I mentioned the 3 reports that are due. There are Word and PDF versions of the templates, so you should have that. If you need anything to help you complete the reporting, just email us at rmselfassessment@nara.gov. And if there are any changes to your contact information, if you didn't receive anything, then you also need to let us know so that we can make sure you have what you need, which hopefully you've already done, considering that the reporting period ends Friday. So any questions about reporting? That's good. That's what I want to see. Everyone's got it covered, right? Okay. What did I just do, Jim? There we go. All right, so at this point I'm going to bring up Lisa Haralampus to talk to you about digitization regulations.
Thank you very much. My name is Lisa Haralampus, and I'm the director of the National Archives Records Management Policy and Outreach Program. And I feel like we should all just take a deep breath and pause, because we have hit you with so much information today. You're really getting a sense of all of the programs in records management and how they work together, from hearing about scheduling to training to oversight to our colleagues in the Federal Records Center program. Whew. But there's one more thing to cover before we finish today, and that is some of the latest information I have to share on the digitization regulation. All right. The good news is you're hearing probably for the first time today that NARA has published our digitization rule. It went live in the Federal Register. It is on April 10th, so just last Wednesday it went out. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if my timing works, if Murphy's Law works right, you'll probably be getting a communication about it via AC memo by the time we're done with BRIDG today, because we were trying to get that out today or sometime this afternoon. So you can look for more information in that AC memo, or you can find more information right now. I recognize that many of our BRIDG participants are online, so I'm waiting a few minutes if anybody wants to check out those links so they can actually see what I'm about to talk about. We've posted them both on the Federal Register and on regulations.gov. Both those sites have the same content. One was a shorter URL, so if anybody was typing it in, I thought I'd share both. The regulation that we're specifically talking about is 36 Code of Federal Regulations, Subchapter 12, Part 12, Chapter 12, Subchapter B, Part 1236. For 1236, for those of you who know, that's where electronic records management standards and regulations are. And we have created a new subpart within that part, and it is Subpart D for digitizing temporary federal records. We followed the normal regulations process in developing this. You first may have seen this digitization regulation back on September 10th. That was when we posted it on the Federal Register and on regulations.gov for public comment. So we had gone through the entire process. We posted it in September. We received a number of public comments. I think it was about 20 comments or so. And we worked on adjudicating those, trying to get answers to the questions, trying to make sure what we said was clearer. We were able to publish it in the Federal Register, as I said, on the 10th. It will actually be effective. There's a 30-day waiting period for one last chance for Congress to decide if they want to change something. And this part will be effective on March 10th. And how did we get here? Why are we here? Just as a reminder, when the Federal Records Act amendments were updated in 2014, one of the requirements in that, and I'm going to make sure I read it correctly here on my notes, one of the requirements was that NARA promulgate regulations establishing standards for the reproduction of records by photographic, microphotographic, or digital processes with a view to the disposal of the original records. So in other words, the law said, issue your digitization standards and do it via regulation. So that's what we've done. So what are the standards and how do they look like? Or what do they look like? Because I knew I was giving to this is a preview, this is the premiere party of the digitization regulation, I thought it would make sense just to copy, and we're going to go through the full text of the next 3 parts of this digitization regulation. There's a little bit, there's a little bit of warm-up for those of you who want to go back and read the full thing, but basically, this part 32, 1236-32, contains the 5 items that are for that contain the digitization standards. I'm not going to read these line by line. I'm just going to provide some commentary while you have a chance to look them over. And the first commentary is, I see as you're looking at this, you're saying, these are not very technical. These are very high level. And that was done on purpose. When we were conceiving the plan of how we're going to handle digitization regulations and digitization standards, we went and used, and the clue was in the language I just read to you, we went and used the micrographic standards that are contained in CFR Part 1238. So 1238 had micrographic standards. Those were written back in the 50s and 60s. But that was where you start. Start looking, what have we done in the past? What can we learn? What can we leverage? And we noticed that in the past, they had a very high-level standard for micrographing temporary records and a very detailed technical standard for doing micrographics for permanent records. So we are going down that same path. We have a very high-level standard for temporary records, and we're going to have a very detailed standard for permanent records. The crux of the micrographic standard, and the part that I like the most, for me, one of the keys to these 5 standards, is item number C, that says an agency must ensure they can use the digitized versions for all of the purposes that the original source records served, including have an ability to attest to transactions and activities. In the micrographics, they sort of talked about 99 years and lower. We don't get into that here with this regulation. For all temporary records, once they're digitized, can they serve the original purpose? And the reason I like this is because it helps me answer the questions on the other parts of the standards. For example, let's just take an example here. Part A says capture all information. We've left that high level so that agencies have the flexibility to determine what information they needed. But again, how do you know the answer to that question? What information did I need? Well, what information did you have on the originals? And let's take something very specific, a concrete example of dates. Date's a piece of information. Well, what date did you need on the originals? Did you need the date of the document, the date of action on the document, the date the document was closed? Will you need to know the date the document was scanned? These are all the parts of information that you might want to look at when scanning and creating metadata and indexing for dates. And the question is, well, what did you need with the originals? And what dates do I need to capture so it can still serve the same purpose as those originals? The pages and parts part of the standard has a similar example. So, you're scanning. Do I have to scan the front page and the back page? What do the standards require? Looking at item C, they have to serve the same purpose. Did I need to know information on the front and on the back when I had originals? Then yes, I would have to scan both pages. When I'm scanning, and our colleague Dave Miller talked about document processing, and you might say, well, I actually saved the envelope, I had a sticky, I had a note card, and I put all those things together with a paper clip, and I saved that entire letter with every part that was associated with it. Well, why did you save it? If you saved it because all of it had meaning and information that was needed to do your business, then you would have to scan all those pages and parts to meet your business. If it turned out you just had a straight row of correspondence and there was never anything on the back, well, then you could talk about I've captured all information and all the parts. The back was always blank. It wasn't necessary for me to scan. So again, it's an example that the standards themselves are constructed to be very high level and very flexible to account for the wide variety of digitization projects and activities that happen within the federal government. Okay, those are the standards. I'm going to say this on the end of every slide. If you have questions, which I'll be happy to take now, if you want some time to think about the questions and come up with some more specifics, you can send questions to ACPS. That is the name, that is the acronym, the organization of the unit that's responsible for this, the Records Management Policy and Standards Team, so acps@nara.gov. You can send questions there, or you can send them to me at lisa.haralampus@nara.gov. So, I'm just giving you that before we move on to the next slide, which is I've scanned, I've gone to standards, what's next? Next is the validation. And again, we didn't coordinate this, but I appreciated hearing Dave's presentation because he sort of outlined some of the steps that he does in digitization scanning services for the Record Center, and you can see how it maps so complementary to the regulations and the policy. So you've scanned according to standards. What's next? The next step is validation, which specifically, how you must, there's 2 musts and 2 mays here. You must validate to make sure that the scans are of a suitable quality to replace the originals. You must do some sort of validation, some sort of quality check to make sure the scanning was done well. How you do this is a may. We have written the regulations to provide, again, that wide degree of flexibility. You can establish your own process. If you're using a third-party vendor, you can document or you can use their processes. How you want to validate them is up to you. The standard says validate them according to the previous part, 32, which is it complete? Did you contain all information, all pages and parts? And those other two items, could I find them? Could I retrieve them? Am I able to access them over time? The next must, I said there's two musts. One, that you must validate. And the second must in this part is you must document the validation. We're going to have to start keeping track so that you can attest, as it said before, attest and verify that the records were scanned successfully. So under this regulation, we say agencies must document the validation process and retain that documentation for the life of the records that were digitized, or the digitization process, whichever is longer. I will say at this point, we are going to be providing more guidance via the general record schedules that specifically relate to the disposition authority. That is, the concepts are outlined in the regulation, and GRS will be coming soon to talk about that a little bit further. When we adjudicated those 20 comments, one of the comments and questions we got was, so this validation documentation that you mentioned in the proposed rule, is NARA going to approve that? Does NARA need to do an approval of validation processes? And the answer was no. We are not planning to do any approvals or certifications. We're not running a digitization certification process. As we answered that question, we said the one thing that we may need is we may need at some point to review documentation. There's a wide variety, and you've heard all of our colleagues talk about it today, about oversight, or even appraisal in the future, or even some other way that NARA may be looking for. We would like to reserve the right to review validation documentation, but that's a may that we wanted to have in the future. It's not a must that's required now. Okay, so I've talked about standards. I said, here's the standards to follow. Here's some information, some regulations on validation so that you know you follow those standards. Big question is, can I now dispose of the temporary original source records? And Section 36 of the new regs covers disposal of original source records. By the way, I'm going to say that throughout this entire discussion here for the next 15 minutes. That's our new term of art, original source records. We talked about originals and we talked about source, and then we realized there was some confusion over time. So now we've just tried to be really clear that once you digitize records, what you have with the paper, the things that were or the analog, whatever was digitized, those are the original source records. The commentary I would make is they are not non-record reference copies in the way that this regulation is written. There may be other exceptions, again, we can talk about it, but the way this regulation was written, there's an assumption that the reason you are digitizing is because you want that information in a new format, in a new way to do some business need for your agency. And so you are going to have the original source materials, that was the originals, the paper copies, and now you have your digitized versions. What is the authority to get rid or to eventually dispose of both those sets of records? The authority for the original source records, now that you've scanned them and validated them, is currently GRS 5.2 intermediary records. Or you may have an agency-specific schedule because as the scheduling process went through, there was planning of we're going to have two different versions. I need this set for this long and this set for that long. So you have an authority currently that you could use. I've checked the standards, I've validated, and I have an authority that I can now use to destroy the original source records. The scheduled disposition for the digitized version is now what they were originally scheduled as, because the digitized version is now serving the same purpose as the originals. That's now the record-keeping copy. That will now have to be maintained, managed until its disposition time frame is over. A couple other notes I wanted to make sure. This is a very new topic, so I'm actually going to double check, put on my glasses, and make sure I'm hitting all the notes I wanted to hit on this first preview of these records. Oh, some questions we had were, will agencies, now that we've issued this, and I've done digitization in the past, do I have to rescan my records? What do I do if the standards I had in the past don't meet the standards in this regulation? And the answer is that agencies may need to assess their prior digitization work, and if they are generally not compliant with this regulation, you may need to retain the original source records or decide whether or not you would want to rescan them. So the reason I wanted to go through this process was, wait a minute, rescan my records, and the answer was generally non-compliant with those standards, which if you think about them, they were very high level and they were very flexible. So it's a bit of an exercise to determine, have I captured all the information, the parts? Am I able to retrieve them? Am I able to attest that these are indeed the records I've got? Do I have any validation information of what I did and how I did it? If so, you would generally not have to rescan. That was not the effort. But we wanted to put out that warning that if you think you are not compliant with these regulations, there's some things we're going to have to talk about what the agency may or may not need to do. Item C was also the same question we received about validation. We received about disposition. Is an agency going to need NARA's approval to destroy scheduled temporary records that have been digitized according to this part? And we wanted to make it very clear, so we put it right in the regulation, item C. No NARA approval or authority is needed because we have stated what the regulations are, we've explained the validation. It is agencies now have the authority. We are not setting up a NARA certification, validation, accreditation process for digitization. Okay, those were the big deep breaths. First it was the standards, then it was the validation, then it was the disposal. What's next? And the answer is, well, that was actually it as far as the regulations go. What's next from the perspective of our office and our program, which focuses on guidance and policy and products, we do have a couple more things in the works. The biggest thing, one of the top priorities for our team right now, is regulations for digitizing the permanent records. Those are going to be the far more technical, detailed standards as one would have seen in the micrographics. We are basing those standards on, and once again, I'm going to read this to make sure I get it precisely correctly. We are basing our draft regulations on the Federal Agency Digital Guidelines Initiative, which is FAGI, on their technical guidelines for digitizing cultural heritage materials, creation of raster image files, 2016. We are also using a metadata standard, which is, and I'm going to say this out loud for those of you who are online and using the reader. The metadata standard is ANSI, ANSI, NISO, ANSI NISO, Z39.87, 2006. That's the citation. The plain language name for that is the Data Dictionary, the technical metadata for digital still images. So those two products are what we're planning to base the permanent standards on, and I've been sharing that information over and over. So if folks want to know, well, will my digitization practices that are currently mapped to standards that are going to be proposed, that's what we're using to base it on. However, I cannot answer the question of if I meet that, I will comply with the future standards, because they are future standards and they haven't gone through the process yet. We are hopeful that this standards will be out for interagency review. If we can get them developed, get them through our internal reviews, get them over to OMB and have their blessing, they should be going out for interagency review in the early fall. If we get that done properly, we're looking at public comment again in 3 to 6 months. 3 months after that, I should say. It shouldn't be 6 months. So they are going to be coming once that process is done and we go through the whole regulations path. we'll then be able to answer the question of what are we actually saying for digitization regulations. More guidance is going to be coming. I said it once already, and I'm going to say it again. We are looking at updates to the general records schedule with our general records schedule team. Our goal is clarity and consistency. So we have the intermediary records 5.2. That's a valid schedule right now. We would like to look at some tweaks or some updates to help make it really clear original source records are intermediary records, to make it really clear the disposal instruction to offer that clarity on the validation documentation. So again, that process, it will come out. It's a 3 to 6 month process for GRS updates. So our hope is that by 2020, we'll have all of our pieces in line and they will all complement each other. We are also looking at our current media neutral notification process, and we are also looking at requests for exceptions. So for permanent records that are coming to the National Archives, and I don't know if digitization is going to work, what might an exception be? And my comment now is that all of these pieces have to fit together like a puzzle, and that is why we are looking at all of those processes concurrently. So we've successfully done the temporary records digitization standard regulation. We're hip deep in the permanent records regulation, and we're considering what changes to make to media neutral and what we might do for exceptions. But we don't have any further guidance to share at this time, other than we're trying to make sure they're all consistent and that they meet NARA's strategic plan and the President's reform plan of trying to get to digitized government by 2022, as far as transferring records to NARA is concerned. The last piece I wanted to highlight for you now, because I'm hoping you'll see it within the next 3 months or so, is a digitization cost-benefit analysis paper. Our colleagues who work on the Federal Records Management Council, the FRMC, which is a council sponsored by NARA, have been looking at digitization also from the perspective of agencies and where their cost-benefit analysis that they do when they determine when to undertake a digitization project. They have delivered a paper, and we hope to be able to share that for agencies as well. I think it's some of the things you have to think about when you're digitizing. It's going to describe the benefits, risks, and challenges of digitization. It's going to talk about considerations for whether digitization is a viable option. And it's meant to provide some practical support of the business decision of when to or not digitize. And by practical support, I mean a price chart and some tools, some calculation tools to sort of help you determine, well, if I'm going to digitize, how many boxes do I have? What might that look like, and what will the cost be? So hopefully we'll have that paper also. It is a paper, but I put it under as a guidance product for us because it's more information we can share about digitization, the better. So those are the products that are coming up next. I'd like to pause, as everybody else has done at the end of the presentation, and again say, does anybody have any questions about the information I've just shared so far? And I'll remind you that there's also ACPS at nara.gov. We've got a couple questions in the audience.
Hey, Lisa, while we're waiting, I just want to let you know the AC memo was received by people right as you started talking.
See, Murphy's Law, that's how it happens. I was hoping to be able to say, oh, this went out. And that's real-time. Talk about a real-time presentation today. I had been concerned I was going to have to tell you a status update, and now I'm so pleased to be able to share this concrete information.
Good morning. I'm Lynette Cosby from CMS, and I wanted to know if you had or if you can make available a sample validation policy or best practices for that kind of policy, and also with the validation documentation.
Yes, that is a great question. We are definitely hoping to have best practices and examples of what validation documentation can look like. Again, the beauty of the way what we'd like to do is have a repository of things for people to look at that cover a variety of different types of validation products. We are looking at that. That's one of the products we'd like to do. We're also hoping that we might be able to get information that's just shared, because people have been doing a lot of digitization for a long time, so it shouldn't be hard to, now the standards are out, start collecting and sharing that information amongst the federal records community. But yeah, thank you. Yes.
Good morning, Lisa. Troy, Energy. The questions with regards to 1236, 36C, when NARA issued some guidance, I think it was December 2007, everything after records control-wise was media neutral.
Yes.
Does this regulation effectively push it all the way back to the beginning of time for temporary records? Because if you choose on the media-specific paper to digitize it, it by default becomes media neutral?
There's a lot to unpack on that question, Troy, because I think you're asking a scheduling question about what is the scheduling authority, which we issued back in 2007. The piece we were missing was the digitization standard part. Could you restate your question again? Because I don't think I followed it.
Prior to December 2007, let's say 2000,
Yeah.
something media specific, it's not written as media neutral. If you now choose to apply this regulation to it and digitize it and follow this, you now can get rid of the paper even though it was specific to paper.
Correct. So yes, thank you for restating that and helping me follow through the logic. That was the intention with the standard, and I'm going to trust my colleagues will help me on stage if it's a very complicated point to get across. But that was the point with the digitization standards. Now that we have the standards and the validation and piece, as I said in the beginning, there's an assumption that the reason you're digitizing is because you wanted to replace the old series exactly with the new digitized versions. Therefore, if you've met the standards and validated, the digital versions are now the record-keeping copy, and they have to hit that schedule, whatever it once was. So it's like media neutral. I even hesitate to say, I don't want to say media neutral, knowing that there might be questions about it. I'll just try to be very specific and say, therefore, the digitized versions, the record-keeping copy, has to be maintained according to that scheduled item. And the paper versions, I say paper versions as shorthand, the paper versions can now be disposed of as intermediary records. So you have a schedule for the paper copy, and your existing schedule is now the schedule for the electronic.
Okay. Thank you.
Whether it was media neutral or not. That is a great question, and I am sure that is a question we're going to get many times. With the AC memo that just went live, we are creating an FAQ page on our website for frequently asked questions. We knew we were going to be getting a lot of questions, and we wanted to have a place where we could park them so people can see fully vetted, appropriate, responsive answers. So keep in mind that with the AC memo, there will also be an FAQ. All right, any questions? Yes.
My name's Andrea Jenkins. I'm from USDA Rural Development. So my question is, we have to have all of our permanent records managed by the end of this year. We have a lot of permanent records that are hard copy that we want to digitize, but you're not going to have that reg out. So we've talked about sending over the original, hard copies, but they don't want to let them go. So we're like stuck between a rock and a hard place on non-digital permanent records.
Right.
What should we do?
I've heard a lot of shorthand in that question, and I'm going to repeat it back to you so that we can, in the longhand form, which is you've got permanent records that have to be managed by the end of this year. I'm assuming you're referring to the 2019 goal within the Managing Government Directive. That I will point out again, I'm sorry, not again, that sounded, I will point out, as we've been saying over and over again, that the 2019 goal was for managing permanent electronic records in electronic format. It was please do not print and file things that were born electronically or born digitally.
Right.
So it's a little different than saying, what do I do with the permanent paper records?
Okay.
With the permanent paper records, according to the new NARA strategic plan goal, we said, look, come 2022, we are planning to the fullest extent possible, and that is, I almost want to say to the greatest, because it's been pushed farther and farther as we get clarity on what that means, that those paper records could not be sent to us as a direct offer post-2022 to the greatest extent possible, which means it could go, and that's what you were like, I could send this, but they don't want to. The long form is I could send it to a National Archives Federal Record Center program, because if it's in the Federal Record Center program by 2022, then digitization would not be required. There is
Right.
that specific statement in those plans. So I will use this opportunity to once again say, please consider for older records that are not in active use but are still in your agency custody, if you really thought digitization is not the solution, please consider transferring them to a federal record center before 2022. So again, you are in a rock and a hard place because they're paper. They don't want to be sent, but how am I going to scan them? I would say there is a little time from the 2019 deadline, because the 2019 deadline doesn't say scan by 2019. It says managing permanent electronic records by 2019. So there is some time. And I would also say for the scanning plans that you're doing, you could use those two standards as a thought piece of where to go and start looking at that level of scanning for some of the particulars and, you know, what do I have to do to test equipment? What do I have to do to, what are the parameters that are going to be used? Because you'll have an idea of where we're heading, so you're not developing requirements in the dark completely.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Lisa, we have a question from online. Will NARA take delivery of long-term electronic temporary records?
Long-term temporary electronic records to our federal record center programs is what I would assume would be the answer, because we wouldn't take them to the National Archives. And I am going to look for help on that question, because I know there. Sorry, Gordon, would you take the microphone to help answer that question? And the reason I want to look for help is because I know it's important that we be precise and accurate, and I had an idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, right. Yeah, there are two questions here. I think it is if there is a bunch of electronic records, and do we have the capacity to store a bunch of electronic records? We do not. However, we do have customers who may have CDs or those things, and they may put them in a box situation, which they'll need to talk to a record center about. Any analog records we'll take in before 2022. But again, we would probably have to talk to our center, because if you're talking, bunches and bunches of the CDs or tapes, that could be an issue, and we should have that discussion before you do that.
Yeah, the way I was going to respond is there's a difference between taking in media, like boxes and CDs or
Yes.
thumb drives, or we don't have a server farm set up in our record center
No,
program
obviously we won't do that at all.
to do that. But I know sometimes things end up in boxes, so thank you for that, for the correct answer. Some more questions?
Hey, Lisa, we got one more from online. Patty Stockman from NASA is asking, will NARA please streamline their process for dealing with agency schedules for permanent records approved prior to 2007 so that we may transfer digitized permanent records to the archives under those schedules?
So there are some scheduling issues that are preventing the transfer going forward. I say, Patty, we will do our best to work with you. That's all I can say. But I appreciate the effort, and I'm sure we have been in contact about that issue before. And if you'd like to, we can talk about it further offline to figure out what is the specific scheduling issue. And the good news is our colleagues, Maggie's here, so she and I will go talk about that afterwards and figure out what the piece is. I will say, though, that might be part of what I was talking about before with the media neutral and exceptions, how we're trying to make this puzzle fit to support NARA's goals. We know there's a lot of pieces that have to be put together to meet that vision and to comply with the law. Thanks, Patty. One more? Okay.
Christopher Forning, HHS Indian Health Service. If I'm correct, NARA digitizes records for federal agencies. And if you're doing that, what does your validation process look like?
We do offer a digitization service. Thank goodness all the right people are in the room to have the right questions today, and that's what Dave Miller was talking about earlier. And they do have a quality control process, and I know we talked to them to get insight. We developed the regulations, so I will let Dave answer.
Is this on? Hi, this is David again. Yeah, we're very interested in seeing the new regulations about the specifics about the documentation of the validation process, because that's something we don't have a consistent application of now. But all the records scanning projects that we do in a production mode for agencies, we do have that discussion about what kind of validation we need and what steps we need to document during that process to satisfy you and ourselves. But to be honest, we don't have a consistent scheme about what documentation we have in that package in the form that NARA might want to review at some point. That's something we'll be closely looking at.
Dave's specifically talking about the permanent records. So if you're scanning permanent records, the digitization standards that I mentioned, they talk about 100% verification. Not human, it doesn't say human or automated, but those are the kinds of parameters that we need to know. Did you want 100%? We want batch checking after scans are done to make sure the equipment's calibrated. Those are industry standard practices, but we haven't articulated which. For the temporary records, which we do scan quite a bit of temporary records, we gave that flexibility to determine what validation would be appropriate, and that's where some of the control measures that the services that they provide have the flexibility to map to the type of records, the cost, and the complexity. Because again, if you are just doing a straight run and doesn't require a lot of document prep, then there might be some automated tools that would be sufficient. Which gets back to the original question of could you show us some examples of what types of validation? We recognize that this standard, and part of the reason why it's so high level, is it covers people who are digitizing 4 boxes and people who are digitizing 40,000. So the length and the difference means that there might be different quality checks that are possible depending on the nature of the project, and there's flexibility to determine which works for you. Those are great questions.
So it's Sammy. So you guys have a scanning guideline document on your website for planning these projects that you guys use. And it says about the validation of, well, how you guys validate your scanning process and that you guys could process out to us.
Right.
So y'all got something out there. So
that document that's about scanning was we've shared information about how the National Archives scans archival holdings. The difference is those standards, we never throw away the original source records. Those standards were for the scanning standards that are going to go into our catalog, so they don't require the same amount of validation or rigor that we have for the temporary records to use for attesting or for the permanent records that agencies will be scanning, and then we will never have the paper, we will only have the scans. So there's multiple digitization guidances available, and we'll try to help when we use our website to make it clear what the different policies are and what we've used them. But I think you're referring to digitization scanners that are on our website that we've shared, so when agencies want to scan records, they know what they have to, or when companies who are bidding on NARA scanning projects, they can see what the standards are we're using, or if we have a partnership with somebody who's, I want to scan records, they know what standard to use. It's the eye to disposal that made this effort a little different. So digitization standards with a view to disposal. And hopefully that makes people feel comfortable to know the National Archives is not planning to throw away the records that are here at the archives. All right, well, this was a very rich topic. There's a lot to say. It's the first time some of you are seeing it. So fear not, there will be more coming. Again, you can send questions to acps@nara.gov, and we'll be happy to work through and provide more information. And stay tuned. I hope to be able to talk about these future projects at future BRIDG meetings. And now for a little stagecraft. I would like to invite the members of my colleagues who are coming to the panel to start walking that way and coming up and filling the stage. But for the rest of the audience, pay no attention to the activity happening in front of us, and instead, Jim Stossel is going to come up and talk about our records management website.
Thank you, Lisa. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Jim Stossel, and I do the outreach activities for the records management side of NARA. Back in October of last year, we redid completely the main page of our website. So we've been meaning to show you what we've done since then, but haven't had a chance with cancellations and everything. This is the first opportunity we've had. So the first thing I want to show you for people who don't even know that we have that part of our website, because if you go to the main National Archives page through archives.gov, or you can use nara.gov and it'll take you to the same place, what you have to do from there is scroll completely down to the bottom of the page until you see this little title over here called For Records Managers. And when you click on that, you finally end up at the records management part of NARA. And this is what we've redone completely. We turned the main page into something that we hope is more intuitive for you. We divided it into two sections, the main part of the page, and then on the right-hand side, we have the latest news and events that we are doing. We have contacts that are important for you, various agency contacts within your agencies about records management, and then some communities of interest that we are involved in, including the FRMC, the FRON, and the ERMOG, which is a relatively new one that has an important role to play in digitization standards and things like that. So in the main part of the page, we've divided it into our main business activities, and it corresponds to our offices as well. So, and in the upper left-hand part of the page is some of the important portals that you may need to get to in order to do your records management functions, including ARCIS, the ERA, and you can not only find information about these parts of records management in these sites, but you can log into them if you actually are going to do work on them. And then finally, down at the bottom is the Federal Records Center, where you can actually look up each of the centers and find information about contacts there and what they actually do. Over here is scheduling and transfer. That's another office here where, of course, that's the function that they perform, scheduling and transfer. And on here you can see that you can go to each one of the different scheduling requirements like GRS. You can see about RSC, the agency records control schedules. You can see information about how to do inventory scheduling, and then you can find important contacts as well, which is one of the most important things we provide. And then another part of our office is doing oversight and reporting with Don Rosen. You can see some of the things that he does, and as we get the inspection reports in, we actually post them here so you'll be able to access them online. And then finally, Gary Rockfuss's department with training and education. As he showed you a little bit before, we're going to populate this with some of the actual records management training courses out of the catalog that you can take now that they're all being provided online. And then finally, down at the bottom, we have two little boxes that contain information of continuing importance, such as policy and guidance documents, and important topics of the day that continue on. So some older information about email management, and then our Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative, or FERMI, that we've been talking a lot about in shared services, and some transfer formats guidance. I'm sure the digitization guidance will go on there eventually, because these are items of continuing importance as we go forward. So that's pretty much it. I hope it's a much more usable site for you. Once you're actually down into the site, you can either bookmark it, or if you see up here after the archives.gov, it's /records-mgmt. So if you haven't been there yet, go there. We're trying to make it better for you over time and help you connect with us in better ways. So I don't see the members of the panel yet. Oh, there's Laura. Very good. Yes, ready for you. Are there any questions about the website or access to it, or any information that you haven't been able to find or anything like that? I don't see anybody. If you have any in the future, please contact us through either my email, james.stossel@nara.gov, or any of the ones that you find on the web page. Did I see a hand? Okay, all right. Very good.
Thanks, Jim. I think Jim might be thinking it's April 1st and not April 15th. So we didn't clue him in on the timing for the session, so I do want to apologize. We had a lot of content to share with you today, and we were hoping to get through all of the content and still reserve some time for our panel at the end of this session. But one thing that I've learned is that you never hold people past lunch on Eastern time, and I don't want to do that today and bring a panel up here for you to ask questions, but then we don't have time to answer them. So note to self, actually note to Jim, for our next meeting in June, we will make sure that the program is a little bit briefer so that we have some time at the end so that we can do the Q&A panel, because we've done it before. It's been very good for us to hear what all of you think, to hear what's on your minds, and to have some discussion about what's going on in records management across the government. So let me... Okay.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
Okay. So we're trying to get to the last slide so we can show you when the next meeting is. There you go. So June 18th is our next meeting. Again, just a reminder for those of you who work with appraisal teams 2, 3, and 4, or you may have questions for Maggie about posting record schedules. David Miller is going to be back to talk about digitization for the FRCP. Please join us upstairs at 1 o'clock. It will be in the Washington and Jefferson rooms. So hopefully see you there. And at this point, it is 3 minutes to noon. So have a great lunch if you're here on the East Coast. And we will see you next time in June. Thank you.